Greetings, Healthy Voice listeners. You are listening to or perhaps watching the Healthy Voice podcast. And today is Saturday, June 27th, 2026. And I'm recording this at around 1:30 p.m. in California. And this whole week on my platforms, Substack and YouTube, I have been putting out content that basically shares tips from my own personal experience. And so I try to do this sparingly because I want to keep my own life as relatively private as possible. But every now and then, it is helpful to hear what the teacher has gone through. This is something that I've always done with my students is I find that it makes it easier to connect with your students when they can see you as a human being who knows how it feels to go through the things that they're currently going through. And so for today's podcast, I was inspired to talk to you about something that I call the silent breakup. And I'm sure I didn't invent that term, but that is the phrase that came to my mind as I was reflecting on this idea of breaking contact with somebody who has been bad to you. I saw the movie Gaslight for the first time in my life last night. And it was an interesting experience. First of all, it was an incredible film. I love film. I'm kind of a film nerd ever since living in proximity to Hollywood for pretty much all of my grown-up life. And I've become a bit of a film buff. I shouldn't really say it like that. There are so many movies I haven't seen, but I'm trying to catch up on all the classic films, and this is one that's been on my list for a while. And watching it was hard from a personal perspective because I've experienced gaslighting from a few people in my life, some significant relationships. And it took me such a long time to figure out what was going on. I didn't even really learn the term gaslight until really not that long ago. I think it was maybe 5 years ago, maybe at the most. Up until that point, the way I would describe the behavior that I was becoming more aware of, I should say, in these particular relationships is I just called it lying and manipulation. I didn't know that there was a term that could combine the two acts, because that's basically what gaslighting is. It's lying to a person consistently in order to manipulate their perception of reality. And as soon as I learned this term, first of all, I thought the term was really stupid. And now that I've seen the movie, of course, now the term makes a lot more sense. But for someone who's never seen the movie, it's ridiculous that this is the term we use. You shouldn't have to watch a film to understand the meaning of a word. I've mentioned before that I much prefer the term perspecticide, which is really hard to say. So I guess maybe that's not a good one either. But that means where someone's perspective is murdered. I actually like tough language. If you've never seen George Carlin's bit on soft language, I highly recommend it. I agree with him on all fronts that our language has become too soft. I like a word that packs a punch, that makes you feel the emotion behind the meaning. And perspecticide, side is a word you have for death, murder, and perspective. So the murder or the killing of one's perspective. That's what gaslighting is. And if you've ever experienced this, which you probably have, if you've gotten into any of my content, there's a good chance that you have experienced this. It's debilitating, to say the least. And it can take years and years before you even start to become suspicious that something is wrong. And so when you do start to have your suspicions that something is wrong, now I want to give a disclaimer real quick. This is all my perspective. I do not claim to be an expert on this subject. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I am a voice teacher with a lot of interest, personal experience, and education on crisis intervention, sociology, holistic health, body work, energy work, these types of things. And so I'm giving you my perspective and take from it what you will. It's up to you. I hope that my perspective helps you. So as I was saying, when you start to become suspicious that something is not quite right, it can be very jarring. It can be unsettling because usually, at least in my experience, this can only happen, and I'm not an expert, like I said, but if you were to listen to a lot of experts talk about this, you'll find that they would probably back me up on this. It's not really possible to gaslight somebody who doesn't feel some kind of a natural trust or a natural bond with you, um, a deep care for you. The only way it can work is if they care about, or I should say, if you care about what they think of you. The only way it works is if they can punish you through feelings of guilt or shame. So the experiences that I've had are where people will do mean things or say cruel things to me. And then when I finally decide to stand up for myself, they'll turn around and say, I never said that, or well, you're interpreting that wrong, or no, that never happened, or I don't remember it that way. And so the part that's really hard is that being the person who cares a lot about this gaslighting person and only wants that person to be happy and on good terms with me, what I will do, or what I have historically done, is I will say, oh, okay, I must have confused things. Yeah, maybe I wasn't thinking straight, or maybe I was so caught up in my own insecurities that I didn't really interpret it correctly. Then when they realize you have insecurities, they will use those against you. And so in my experience, I would get a lot of responses like that, like, oh, you're just an overthinker. You just want to create drama. Don't start with me. Don't start that with me. I'm not, or why are you always trying to make trouble? It's like, well, I just, I felt like you were being disrespectful to me and I wanted to say something. And if you push, it gets ugly. It gets really ugly. And the problem with being on the receiving end of this kind of manipulation is that the one on the receiving end is usually susceptible to shaming. And so if maybe you're initially the one who's upset about something that was done to you, but as soon as they get upset with you and they turn it around and get angry at you, now all of a sudden you're the one apologizing. And that's exactly the way they want it. And so when I was about, I would say that I had relationships like this from the time I was a teenager until I was in my, well, I want to say 30s, but to be honest, I didn't fully understand the dynamic until I was already in my 40s. It was in my 30s that I stood up to the most harmful relationships. But what I've learned about gaslighting and manipulation and being attracted to narcissistic type personalities is that it's encoded in your, it's almost like it's in your DNA. There's something about your personality that is so magnetic to them. In fact, one therapist that I've recently discovered on YouTube, and his name is, I think, Ross Rosenberg, I think. He wrote a book called The Human Magnetic, or The Human Magnet Syndrome, or something about. And I think that's a really interesting way to put it, because when you are, you tend to be like this magnet for these difficult people who just want to create chaos and they don't want to take any responsibility for their behavior. And if you call them out on it, they're going to punish you severely. And you're susceptible to it because you're sensitive and you care about what they think. And there's also this, I know for me, and he's mentioned this and I related to this, there's this deep loneliness inside. And there's it's part of the grooming process that begins as a child, where the idea of being abandoned by somebody you care about is so absolutely devastating that you're willing to do anything to stop it from happening, including taking responsibility for something you didn't do, apologizing for something you know you didn't do, but this gaslighter is telling you that you did. Anything to stop the emotional pain. And so, like I said, so the point of this podcast is to help you, the listener, come to some understanding of how to how to end relationships like this. So I ended the most significant relationship, like the one that mattered to me a lot, which was extremely difficult to do. The exiting process was traumatic in itself. But after that happened, what I started to notice was that relationships that did not carry the same kind of emotional weight in my life also started to present as the same kind of dynamic. Like, meaning if I were to become closer to these people who were actually fairly new people in my life, if I were to continue getting closer and closer, sharing vulnerable things with them, showing a lot of care and interest in being there for them and whatever, however you want to describe a blossoming friendship, what I started to realize was I could see red flags, meaning I realized that this was just my dynamic for attracting relationships like this. Again, that's why I think that the whole idea of a human magnet syndrome is a great title, because I started to realize that, well, I just attract people like this, and I need to figure out why. And the only way I'm going to figure out that why is if I can learn how to stand up to and say no to these new friendships as I start to realize, okay, right now you're not personally invested. It does kind of sting to realize that they're not really good friends. Okay, I'll admit that hurts a little bit, but it's not the same thing as a friendship I've invested 5, 10 years into. And then realizing, oh my God, I am dealing with a manipulator. I'm dealing with a liar. I'm dealing with somebody who doesn't know how to love and who doesn't actually value me as a human being. They consider me to be an object, somebody to prevent them from feeling alone in the world. That is painful. And I didn't want to go through that again. And so I started paying really close attention to a few new friendships. And sure enough, I started realizing that I had not actually gotten to the root of my problem. I was still attracting these difficult personalities. And the evidence became very clear. What happened was, in each of these friendships, they allowed their ugly side to come out, I'll just say. They became very difficult. They crossed some boundaries. They became rude and disrespectful. And I walked away after that first incident, as opposed to what I would do in the past is I would brush it off as saying like, oh, they're just having a bad day. Everybody has a bad day and I need to be patient. I need to love them more. I need to love them more. That's something I've gotten really sick of and I don't buy into anymore. No offense if you're the kind of person who believes in that. Like if you think that love and light will cure your enemies, more power to you, but I do not subscribe to that anymore. I will not waste any energy on a person who is cruel to me. And to me, love is an energy source that I only give out to people who deserve it. And so I caught myself though doing that, thinking to myself, maybe I just need to love them more. Maybe I need to be more patient, or maybe I need to reach out and talk to them. And then I realized, wait a minute, let's learn something from the most significant relationships I've had to walk away from. What happened every single time you tried to talk with them, every time you tried to reason with them, have a compassionate discussion? What happened? Oh my God, World War III would break out. Maybe I shouldn't joke about that right now. I'm sorry. That was actually kind of crass. In the past, that would have been an appropriate joke, but right now, forgive me for that. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Chaos would ensue, and I would always end up deeply regretting bringing it up. I would always end up feeling bad, like I had done something wrong. I had overreacted. And then I would just feel really bad for several days, and I would wonder if this person would ever forgive me. Like, that's the thing, is I would try to address a boundary crossing that they had committed, and I would try to do it in a diplomatic way. But somehow I ended up apologizing and feeling bad. And I realized that, it took a long time. It took a lot of education before I started to understand that that's part of this personality type. It's a difficult personality. I think that the word difficult is a good word to describe these people because they're difficult. They don't want to have anything be easy. They can't just they can't just listen to you or have some, at least they can't even try to see your perspective or why you might be feeling bad. They think they're justified in yelling at you. They think they're justified in insulting you or being snarky or making fun of you in front of people. They think it's okay to do that. But if you were to say anything negative about them in a, even like, let's say you're not the kind of person who would actually make fun of them the way they will do that to you, but you will stand up when a boundary is crossed and you will say, hey, like, why did you talk to me like that? And they will take that as if you are making fun of them, abusing them, and they'll turn it around and they'll phrase it in a way where you actually start to believe that you were being abusive. And then you feel really bad and you think, wow, what's wrong with me? Why am I such a bad person? Why is it so hard for me to have healthy relationships? And so when this happened, the first time this happened with somebody who was a very new friendship and therefore not quite as significant to me as someone who had been in my life for many, many years, I realized there is no point in talking to this person. I'm seeing the red flags, and it's based on all the experiences I've ever had with the significant relationships in my life that were difficult and very bad for me, coupled with all the education I was receiving from my therapy. My therapist I had a good therapist at this time, and I was so grateful for that because I haven't always had good therapists, but she was really, really great. She taught me something valuable, which was, see, I've always thought that I have to understand why people do things in order to get past it. And she taught me to be okay with not understanding, and that sometimes I might even want to be grateful I don't understand. And that took a while for me to really absorb. But once I started absorbing that, I realized, okay, so this slightly insignificant new friend in my life just snapped at me over a really innocent question. This person had, and wasn't thinking at the time. If I had been thinking about it, I probably would not have said anything. But I said something very innocent. We were sitting down to a cafe after a workout class, and she had just a drink or something. I said, oh, is that all you're going to eat? Like very, very casual. And she snapped at me and she was like, why don't you worry about what you're eating and I'll worry about me? And I was like, whoa, like we had just sat down. And then afterwards, when I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, she has like eating disorder issues. And I felt really bad about it. But then I started thinking about it and I was like, you know what? Yeah, if I had been thinking clearly, I probably would have been more cautious about that. But like I said, it's a new friendship. She hasn't actually shared the history of eating disorders with me. It's not something that she's talked to me about. It's just something I figured out because of her appearance and some of the things that she said about having to go into the hospital a lot. But it isn't something she's actually shared with me. And I was thinking maybe if she had actually been, maybe if we had been friends for a longer period of time, I would have probably been a little more careful about that. But I meant no harm. And I think that anybody in that moment witnessing it would have been able to see that I meant absolutely no harm. And it was a little slip up, you know? And when people have slip ups, you've got to give them grace. So snapping at somebody like that, almost taking the opportunity to get mad. And by the way, she apologized for it later on. And I appreciated the apology. And I used that as an excuse to keep her friendship in my life. But it went on to happen 2 more times. And so I started to have this attitude of a 3 strikes and you're out. I understand that you may be sensitive about certain things, but I'm also a sensitive human being and I do not deserve to be yelled at, especially for something that I meant no harm by. You got to treat me with dignity too, and I'm going to do my best to treat you with dignity and respect. And so what ended up happening was I remember the last time I saw her, I was just very straightforward with her. I didn't get very sentimental. I actually wanted to be very careful about my speech. I didn't want to seem like I was open to discussing anything. Instead, what I was hoping would happen is that she would read my energy to understand that, look, I'm going to be dignified with you. I'm going to speak to you in a respectful manner, but I'm not going to get personal with you in this conversation. When we say goodbye, that's going to be the last time we talk to each other, but I'm not going to spell it out for you. Because what I learned in that short friendship, coupled with all the other experiences I've ever had, is that you cannot talk about this stuff. You can't say, look, you have broken my boundaries 3 times now, and that's it for me. You can't open up the door like that, because that opens up the door to manipulation. And that was really, really hard for me. I'm not going to pretend like it was easy, like I'm this master of stoicism. It was actually really hard. I really wanted to say something like, I'm sorry, in my head, I went a little low class. I really wanted to be like, bitch, you were so rude to me. But I wasn't going to do that. And so then the next level of my personality wanted to say something like, I felt like you were really disrespectful. But I knew that no matter what I said, whether it was the low class version or the high class version, both of them would have been twisted and turned around and weaponized against me. And I wasn't going to go through that. I realized in that moment that I had a problem with attracting difficult personalities, and that I was going to have to learn to quietly break up with people like this. No drama, no explanation, just a dignified and very emotionally neutral interaction where internally you have made a decision, I'm not speaking to this person again. And, they might not be as stoic as the person I spoke to in that moment. Like there was another situation with somebody who was incredibly disrespectful to me in front of my husband. And it was really, she said one of the most, I guess you could say, hurtful things you could really say to me, although I wasn't hurt because I didn't know her well enough to be hurt, but I knew that her intention was to hurt me, and that bothered me. It upset me. And I realized, I'm in it again. I'm in another friendship with somebody who doesn't respect my dignity, and I'm going to have to walk away from this. So I did the same thing. I did the same stoic, calm, emotionally neutral interaction with a silent agreement within myself. This is the last time we're going to talk. Now, what ended up happening after that was she sent me a flood of text messages trying to explain herself, like basically gaslight me. She didn't apologize because she didn't do anything wrong. She never said what I thought that she had said, and I never accused her of saying it. I just, actually, my husband was the one who told her. My husband, because she reached out to my husband, and he was the one who said, you were really rude to her last night. It was really disrespectful what you said, which really touched me very much. I have to say, it was made me feel really good that he protected me. But I didn't say anything to her. And so she sent me a flood of text messages trying to explain what it was she was really trying to say. And I just ignored them until she finally sent me so many messages, and I felt bad for her. I actually pitied the anguish she seemed to be in. And so I just sent her a text message saying, hey, don't worry about it. I'm totally fine, and I'm confident with my life choices. And that was the end of it. Then I blocked her, and I never talked to her again. So I guess those are 2 examples of a quiet breakup. In the second example, I wasn't necessarily quiet, but I used a strategy. I was strategic in the way I responded to her as a way to sort of get out of the interaction while maintaining my dignity. I was not going to get into a back and forth because there was absolutely no point. One thing I've learned over the years is that when it comes to difficult people, the less you say, the better off you are, because these people will use your words against you. And if you're sensitive, like I am, it's really easy to get you all confused and thinking, well, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I really need to take a step back and look at myself and fix myself, because maybe I'm putting too many demands on people. So anyway, that's my experience with what I call the quiet breakup. And I'm curious, those of you who have been through these types of difficult relationships, I'd love to hear from you. What's it like? What's it been like for you when you actually confront them? And have you ever done a quiet breakup? And what has that experience been like for you? And if you've done both, which one is better in your opinion? I'd really like to know. I'd love to hear what other people have gone through. So thank you for spending some time with me this week. If you didn't read my Substack articles, check them out. I have one article talks about how the way my body has manifested illness in response to chronic stress is sinus problems and headaches. But I didn't talk about headaches. I talked about sinus congestion because it actually applies to voice work. So I talk about all the different things I've done to manage my chronic sinus conditions. And yeah, that's been a real lifesaver. And the other article is about PTSD and the symptoms and how I've learned to manage my symptoms and live really a pretty good life. I'm very proud of the life I've created for myself. Sometimes I think about the things I've been through, and I think it's kind of a miracle that I've gotten to this point. And so in my video, I talk about my favorite practice for managing symptoms, and that's voice journaling. So my YouTube video is about that. And here's my final take, which is how to end one of these abusive relationships quietly. Obviously, this is going to be harder to do if you have like kids together. Okay. I know that this is not going to be the answer to everybody's problem, but then again, I don't know. Maybe you can get creative with some of the things I've shared today. I don't know. I've never been in that situation, so I can't speak to it. But the other, I have done this with very, very close relationships. And so perhaps, I don't know. I don't know what the answer there is. There's probably legal stuff involved if you have children, and I don't know anything about it, but hopefully what I've shared with you can at least spark some ideas. So please subscribe to this channel or share this if you know anybody who it might help. I believe personally that voice work was the tipping point for my recovery. When I started looking at voice practice as a therapeutic tool, as opposed to just maintaining my singing voice so that I could continue my career, my life got significantly better. And so now I take everything I've learned and I share with my students, with the members of my community, with my coaching clients. So if you're interested, please check out the links in the description for my private community, my voice liberation method, my vocal recess activities archive, and also my one-on-one coaching. I would love to help you out. Thanks so much for listening. Keep going because the world desperately needs your unique voice.